If you're familiar right now, the fitness center is right here. So we're going to add a second story, second floor in there. This area right now, that's in the blue primarily, is a one-story portion of the building. There's a couple of classrooms, a coach's area, and so forth in there. This addition would happen over top of that. So the additional 4 classrooms, teacher collaboration space, and commons would be added as a new second floor in that location. So in terms of question 1 and how the costs shake out, we've rounded the number to 27 million as was discussed. It's about 26.9 million in terms of the specific number that will appear on the question. And that consists of what I've described at the 4 elementary schools, at JW Middle School, at Princeton High School, and then the work associated with the field area at the high school. Now, other scope that has been discussed in the past as possibility of being included is listed at the bottom, just so we don't lose track of that. But we've talked about the 5-6 school to handle capacity needs in the future at the elementary and at the JW Middle School. The administration space, that 5-6 school was proposed for here at Valley Road, so administration needed to be relocated, and the purchase of Thanet to support that need. And then the Princeton High School, there was a substantial second phase, which was going to add a great deal of capacity to the high school, which is not included in question 1. So the tax impact of that cost, which is roughly 26.9 million, so you can understand this graph, same one we've shown before. This line represents what the current tax impact of the district's capital debt is. That's $673.59 is the number that applies to the average home. The average home in Princeton is assessed at $837,074. So if question 1 were to pass, this would be, there are just over 3 years of the existing debt service left. The new debt service would add to that. So roughly 56, I forgot my glasses. I should know these numbers by heart at this point, but I don't. So about $56 in the first year, a little over $105 in the third year. And then in the fourth year, the remaining debt service is relatively small. So that would result in a net reduction of just under $400. The average reduction over the 30 years of the bonds, about $479 from what the current debt service is. So the new debt service on the 26.9 is obviously less. The lower numbers kick in after that current debt service is paid off, and then would continue to taper off over the ensuing years of the new debt service. Now, I also wanted to revisit, we have talked periodically about an ESIP, an Energy Savings Improvement Program, and I wanted to revisit this so there's no misunderstanding about what this is and what this is not. First of all, an ESIP actually has nothing to do with the referendum. An ESIP simply is a series of improvements that would be made in the buildings that produce energy savings and produce enough energy savings that they can pay for themselves in a period of 15 years or less. An ESIP is a structured program. It's, you can find out more about ESIPs and other programs that we would try to take advantage of here through the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities website, if you're so inclined. So the challenge with an ESIP is to structure a package of improvements that can pay for themselves in 15 years or less. School districts around the state have been taking advantage of this opportunity because it doesn't add cost to the referendum. So when we identified the range of needs facing the schools, we identified close to $19 million of work that might fit into an ESIP. Now, in order to know for sure if it will fit into an ESIP and what that ESIP will consist of, there's a couple of things that have to be done, the first step of which is already underway. The district is in the process of having an energy audit completed. This energy audit is being done through the local government energy audit program, so it's not costing the district money. That energy audit will produce a report which will come back to us and say, under an ESIP, you could do these things, and these things will save X amount of dollars, and it will kind of lay that out for us. So right now, that audit is underway. We expect it to be completed within the next, say, 2 months. It's being done by a party that was procured through the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and the Clean Energy Program. So an ESIP doesn't add to the cost of the referendum. It's not technically even related to the referendum. The scope is different. And what we did was we left out of the referendum those things that we thought might fit into an ESIP. So lighting replacements, for example. Lighting replacements have a good payback, have a good ability to support an ESIP and get some other things done. So we assume that those would be done under an ESIP because they're fairly low-hanging fruit for an ESIP program. So the referendum, therefore, never included that lighting. We always assumed it would be done under the ESIP, so it didn't add to the referendum cost. The ESIP does not have a tax impact because of it pays for itself, so the district is allowed to issue what are called savings obligation bonds to pay for the installation of, in this example, that lighting. Those bonds are a different type of bond, so they don't add to the district's debt. The savings on an annual basis would be offsetting the cost of those bonds. And in order to prove to the Board of Public Utilities that an ESIP will work, we actually have to develop a year-by-year schedule of those savings and show that that year-by-year schedule will offset the debt service of those savings obligation bonds. And that is why it does not add to the debt of the district, and it does not have a tax impact associated with it. So there are a fair amount of details that we'll get into once we have that energy audit, but I wanted to point out so everybody could understand. It's really two different things. They might be done at or advanced at the same time, but they are not interrelated. The ESIP is a separate structure from the referendum. And with that, any questions, if there are any? Okay.
Thank you, Scott. So maybe this is a good time now to pause and ask for any thoughts or comments from the board. So I'll open it up to the floor if anyone would like to say anything about the proposal that's on the agenda tonight. Yes, Michelle.
I have one question, and that has to do with if this passes and we have a referendum next fall, when would the tax impact of a subsequent referendum hit the taxpayers?
So, well, actually, to answer the first part of your question, so if we put this on the agenda tonight, it would pass in December, and then we would start bringing down bonds and doing construction in 2019. Mm-hmm. So you're asking when's the first bar on that chart? I believe, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong, it would be 2019. 2020.
2020.
Okay, 2020.
So if we did a larger bond offering in November of 2019, we could expect that would hit in 2021? Yes. All right, the tax impact would be felt in 2021. Okay.
Right. That would begin in 21, and then the drop-off begins in 22, three. So we'd still have a bit. We'd have a $50 year and whatever we decide to do in 19.
Okay.
And on it goes.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Greg?
I just wanted to publicly state my support for this direction and my thanks to the board leadership for developing this plan. And as all of us did over the past few weeks, I've been listening to lots of people throughout our community from all sides, and thinking a lot, not just about what they've been saying and what we know, but also what the history is of our community. And the reason I'm so excited about this is something that has already been mentioned, but I also noticed in our high school, if you walk over to the Performing Arts Center, there's a tablet there. The date's from 2006, and it says, "With special thanks to the people of Princeton for their unwavering support for the education of all of our children." And I think that's the goal. And I think that's the goal that this plan is meant to highlight. And I want to honor that. It's a way of trying to bring us all together while at the same time making sure that everyone knows that the issues that we're looking at, the issues of right now having an older buildings that aren't as secure as they should be, as school buildings all across the country already are, older buildings that don't have air conditioning, and buildings that don't have the capacity for the children who are already here. These are the issues that we need to deal with, but I like the idea of doing that together as a community. And I love the quote about how we shouldn't tear ourselves apart in order to build better schools. And I think this community has had a long history of coming together, and I think we have an opportunity here to come together again. And that's the spirit that I support this proposal going forward.
Thanks, Greg.
I have something.
Yes, Debbie.
So I love the idea of the 5-6 school, and Betsy mentioned once that a 6th grader should be taught by content teachers, and that really resonated with me. So this was another reason I did not want to put 6th grade back with the current elementary schools. I have not liked Thanet, so I'm happy it's not an option for voters right now. My vision is to have a 5-6 and also have administration here at Valley Road. Then I would like to do share services with the town and let the Princeton Public Schools administration use parking across the street at the town building from September to June, because in the summer the pool's open. Then refigure the parking at CP to add more spaces on the land that's on Witherspoon. I'd like to see if we can purchase the old Packet building for parking, and if not, see if we can put our school buses at the shopping center parking lot, and also do shared service with the town and put our maintenance shop over on River Road, where the town has buildings and warehouses, and they keep a lot of their equipment. We are already making PHS staff work with less. All rooms are now classrooms, and we even put teachers in trailers for office hours. PPS, Princeton Public Schools, are not the schools we grew up in. There's been talk about PHS had 2,000 students once, and that was okay. Things have changed. The school is older. Students and families want more from their high school experience. So we can't compare PHS back in the 70s to what we want it to look like now. I want Steve to concentrate on making every student known in our school district. Sorry. Someone asked me why we extended the teacher contracts out to 2020. And I said so the teachers could teach. That is what we need them to do, and that is what our children want them to do. Many people complain about the last referendum and the lawsuits on the PAC. I hear you, and we have talked a lot about bringing in a project manager to work with us so that this won't happen again. When someone comes up to the microphone and says, "This is the first time I heard about Thanet or a new turf field," it's really hard for the board to hear. The public also needs to do some research on what's happening in the community. The paper, the internet, but something. Going forward, I'm excited to work together with the community members to create and even make a better Princeton Public School system for all our children. Therefore, I support the $27 million proposal tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Beth?
I just want to ask a few questions, I think, so we can discuss a little bit about what we're proposing to do tonight. One of the things is for Scott, just again on the smaller package with PHS, I don't know where you are, Scott, just to reconfirm for us that the renovations to HVAC and things like that are separate from what we had talked about doing in the larger expansion. So just to get to the idea that I don't want to be supporting something that's going to have us do something twice or fix something that then has to be reopened again if we want to continue to expand the building.
Yeah, so the mechanical improvements are split across the two questions, but I think can be done in a way that has minimal risk of them overlapping. So the initial question has a small amount of money in there to address controls and some of the more urgent issues that you're having in the system right now. Additionally, under the ESIP, which we anticipate moving forward in a similar time frame, more extensive building controls and those types of upgrades can often fit into an ESIP. Now, that's a little bit of a question because we don't know how much savings are going to be there to offset that cost or how much savings that will produce. So that will be determined once we have the energy audit. The broader mechanical improvements that were part of the bigger high school project, which is now part of the other that I had listed up there, that included replacing, as part of the renovations in various classrooms, for example, replacing those mechanical units, replacing rooftop units, and doing more extensive mechanical unit and system replacement. So the controls kind of operate the system. The second piece, which was part of that broader renovation, is really the system or the equipment behind the system. So the risk of overlap there is relatively small, but it's something that we'll watch very closely.
Okay. And again, so if there were to be projects in the ESIP, which we would learn after the audit is complete, that we'd already gone to bond for as part of the smaller package, then we would end up just not spending the money on those items because they would be covered under the ESIP financing?
Correct.
So just to point that out, that there might be things that we are getting approvals for that could possibly be covered in the ESIP, although we don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, there is, although there's not a lot of risk of that, because what we're talking about under the referendum is adding air conditioning. Adding air conditioning doesn't produce energy savings; it increases energy use.
Okay.
So air conditioning typically is not a good candidate for an ESIP. But any unit work that might be done, the possibility that some of the units being provided for those classrooms could be done as part of the ESIP, and then the air conditioning separate, is something that we'll take a look at.
Okay. Something else that we didn't really talk about tonight, but I just want to know what happened to Thanet. We've been talking for months about how we have to do this so quickly and we have this option. Can we hear what's going on with that?
I still like the Thanet property. I hope that it can stay in the mix as we move forward with our talking to the community and among ourselves about the best use of land, limited land within the town of Princeton. It's harder to place land without a clearly defined purpose on a referendum. And so our hope is that the property will be available to us as we move forward. However, as Debbie pointed out, there may be other options that we could look at if we are going to be placing the 5-6 school on the Valley Road site. There may be other options for us to look at for the placement of administration and transportation.
One other thing we haven't talked a lot about, but I assume in connection with any referendum ultimately passes, we could think about philanthropy. And again, I assume if there are groups within the community that wish to help pay for some of the projects that are covered by what we've proposed, that again would then free up funds either to go back to taxpayers or to be used for
Correct.
Other referendum projects that are part of if there's expanded cost or something.
So we continue to have those conversations with those in the community about projects associated with the referendum or operating costs that where we could get contributions to our revenue stream. We're also hopeful that the community may take a look at the tax impact of the future referendum or referenda on our more financially vulnerable members of the community, and that may be an area for philanthropy as well.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to add, for the 5-6 goal, I never, I think you know in closed session, we had a vote, and some of us around this table didn't think Thanet was the best option, and I was one of those. My concern for the 5-6 school is that we have enrollment growth that the smaller question isn't going to address. And so, that doesn't go away. With regard to philanthropy, I think it's important to remember that whatever we're doing, the referendum is the worst case scenario. We can go to the voters and ask them for that, but we can't ask them for more. Steve and I have had very positive conversations with a donor that wishes to remain anonymous, and we're not going to count those chickens before they're hatched, but we're hopeful. But again, we're not going to reduce the referendum based on hope.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Scott, I'll start with you. And then I'll bounce back to Thanet. What does it cost us to wait? What is waiting on the projects cost us? We know what our issues are with enrollment, but and when I say cost, I mean cost impact. What could go up? What could increase? Just what are we at risk for waiting? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I know some things are speculative with bond increases and those kind of things. I just want to know what we're weighing and what the board is making a decision against. What I want to go in eyes wide open. I understand why we have put ourselves, well, I know why we put ourselves in this position, but I want to understand what I'm agreeing to. So if you could help me with that, that would help my decision.
Sure. So relative to the risks, I think I would highlight 3 potentials. The first, I'm fairly confident about, which is construction costs have been in a rising environment. The various things that have happened over the year, tariffs and whatnot, we've seen the impact on the construction industry in some regards. So construction costs tend to rise. Right now they're rising at a slightly accelerated rate because of those things. I don't have a crystal ball. You know, if I did, I'd be retired someplace right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, short of something changing, I expect that rise to continue based on what we know right now.
But is that rise like a 1%?
Well,
Is
you're
that
talking
half
you're talking
percent?
a
I mean,
couple
is
of
it a
you're
small
talking a
thing?
couple of percent probably a year that is at risk on the costs.
Okay.
The second criteria, and you know, again, no crystal ball, but we are in a rising interest rate environment. Bonds and the assumptions related to interest rate go directly to the anticipated tax impact of those bonds. If interest rates rise, right now, the tax impact estimates are using interest rates that are above what the market is holding because they are conservative, but if they do rise above that point, obviously that could increase tax impact costs of any future referendum. And then the third consideration would be, as was mentioned, based on the projected enrollments, you have kids coming. You're already over capacity at the middle school. You're over capacity at the high school. Depending on the timing, should any measures need to be put in place if those kids come faster than anticipated, for example, and you need to put in temporary space or do those things, there would be costs associated with that. So that's not a well-defined risk because I can't pin to a number and say you might have to do X, but the potential is there depending on timing and depending on how fast those projected enrollments bear out.
And what do we pay for the trailers now for the teachers? Because I'm assuming they'll just stay there for 3 years.
So, Stephanie, I don't recall what the...
45,000.
50,000 a year rent.
Per trailer, or is there
For that,
one trailer?
for that package, that's on the site, 50,000
Okay, okay, all right,
out of operating.
okay, thanks.
Installation costs were 400,000.
But that came out of capital reserve, right?
Correct, yeah.
Doesn't matter, cost is cost. The second thing I want to ask about is, it's hard for me to sit around this table and hear about Thanet or the fate of Thanet. The leadership of this board seems to care more about informing the public than they do about informing this board. I read more about what's going on with this board from Phil Curran and Ms. Knapp than I don't like being surprised around this table. So when Beth asked a question, there needs to be a hard answer to those kinds of things. I understand why the public has questions. I have questions. And this leadership has to be buttoned up if we're doing this. So on that point alone, I kind of get the stepping back. I kind of get that. So from the standpoint of doing this first piece, my big issue with it is we're not addressing enrollment, and that's what started the process. Betsy, it's enrollment. And okay, you can say we have 4 classrooms at the high school, but we have a middle school that needs our assistance. I mean, JW is over capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the high school is over capacity. And while this meets needs that are facilities responsible, they're not meeting the critical need of enrollment. So yes, this is something that we need to do. It's a responsible thing for us to do. It's something that the district, I don't think anyone, I'm not even sure anyone out there could argue that the things that we're asking to be done don't need to be done. My concern is we're not addressing the issue of enrollment. So I'm on board for the plan. I am not happy with the process. We are a board of very enthusiastic, hardworking people, but we are here to deliberate and hash things out. We need to be the ones to make decisions. They don't need to be fed to us. But I do support this.
Thanks, Evelyn. Any other questions? Yes, Greg.
With Scott still here, sorry, Scott, I should have asked this of you sooner, but I was going to ask you just to, and I know you've covered this before, but to go over again for the board and for the public, the process that we're going to be using, assuming, let's say, question 1 passes, what the process is going forward in terms of what are the next steps, who oversees, and the way I'm seeing it, what I like about this proposal is that it gives the public a sense of what we're going to be doing for the larger questions that we know have to come after that. And so it's almost like a trial run for everyone to see how the process works on the issues that we know need to be done right away. So I'd love for your guidance just to take us very specifically, step by step, what the process will be going forward, assuming question 1 passes.
Sure. So the process moving forward is going to break down into 2 components. The first being the renovation improvements. So those primarily at the elementary school, at the middle school, and at the high school, and potentially the fields. You know, the documentation and design work associated with those would begin immediately. The goal would be to do as much of that work as we can in the first summer, which would be the summer of 2019. Now, whether we can do all of it during that summer or not will depend on us working out a detailed phasing and impact analysis in terms of, you know, what the impact would be on those buildings, what can we get done over that summer period. Some of the work will take longer than a summer, so we have to plan that a little bit differently. But we're going to try and capitalize on that first summer. And then any work that would stretch beyond that would run through probably the second summer. The second piece would be the improvement at the high school. So the construction of the second floor in the fitness center and the addition would have a longer construction time frame and a longer design time frame. So we would still try to start that over the first summer, but the schedule by its nature, because of the type of project, will run through probably the next summer. So you're talking about a heavy emphasis on the summer of 2019, additional work happening in the summer of 2020 with the goal of everything being completed by that point, if possible. Yeah, and after the referendum, you know, it was mentioned earlier, the possibility of hiring a construction manager, you know, that would happen at that point. The board can solicit and interview firms and make that decision, and we can talk about those options.
And so, Scott, after the referendum passes, does the board have the opportunity for input as far as directing which projects the board feels are the most important, or is that determined by whatever bid we can get filled first?
Absolutely. The board is going to be very involved in this process. You're not going to stop seeing your meetings, and there's going to be a lot of interaction around that planning. So we're going to look at it. We're going to come back to you with the different ways we feel we can maximize what can get done as soon as possible. And there's typically a push and pull on that because, you know, it's easy to do a lot of construction, but there's also a lot of impact on the operation of the schools. So we're always looking for that balance. The sooner we get the work done, the less costly it is. You know, the more we curtail that cost escalation risk. While at the same time, we need to make sure it can happen in a way that the schools remain fully occupied, fully safe, and fully operational the entire time.
Scott, a question about this question 1. What role does Fielding Nair, if any, have in this reduced option? And when would we, if they don't have one, would they be brought back in the process, and when?
So we would probably be involved with them still on the addition, the expansion of the high school, but obviously to a much smaller degree. the second part of your question would, I think, depend on where that deliberation process goes with the community that you've talked about. Presuming it moves in a direction similar to what we've laid out, then I would anticipate, they would be as involved as we currently imagine them to be. However, if it moves in a different direction, I would have to answer that based on where that deliberation goes.
Just to follow up to that, Scott, so Fielding Nair, some of this work on the 4 classrooms in the high school and other things, that's really, I think, Fielding Nair design work.
Mm-hmm.
So are they overseeing that in any way, or are they turning it over to Spiesel to oversee?
No, it was part of the process throughout. So while we will have a bigger role through the construction phases and the final document phases, they are part of that process all the way through, including during construction. So their follow-through is important there because to the degree we're talking about building things in certain ways, certain materials, things like that, they would be part of the process to make sure that comes out the way we design or anticipate it to.
And have you agreed with them how that works? I mean, if one of you wants to do one thing, one of you wants to do another thing, we have 2 architects here, so how is that process controlled and managed?
Architects can be very friendly with each other.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
We get along, but we have already talked about that, and in the context of the broader process, what that role would be, and it's their role is heavier up front, and ours is right there with them, but a little bit lighter in terms of the production effort. And then as we move towards construction, there's a shift there. It's a fairly standard way of working when we team with firms, and we have done projects teamed with firms many, many times. That's a pretty standard way of approaching it. Okay, so we're local, we're accessible to the site. It's very easy for me to pop over, make a visit, look at things, and that works out best through those stages.
And this resolution, I noticed that, we mentioned bond counsel, we mentioned other advisors, but we don't name them. But the only firm that's named here is Spiesel. And so let's just say for argument. And others, okay. So if for example, we wanted to change bond counsel, I assume we could do it under this resolution. But my question is, if for any reason we wanted to change Spiesel, could we do that with this resolution? Or are we bound to you now when we resolve this resolution?
No, the point of the resolution is to identify that Steve and I aren't up here with a crayon making plans and putting in front of the community.
Okay, but if for whatever reason things don't, let's just say, God forbid, things don't go well down the process and we want to make a change in direction, we're not bound to keep using Fielding Nair or Spiesel or anyone else, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Because of this resolution. Okay.
No, if you were more comfortable, you could change the language to say the district's architect as opposed to naming the firm.
Okay.
And just a note on process, a question from a board member earlier said something about if we vote for this resolution and the next year's plan. Just to be clear, we cannot obligate a future board to do anything. So what we are voting on tonight is the question to go on the ballot for December 11th. And then it is this board and then the reconstituted board of next year that would make the next steps. But by no means do I want anyone in the public to think that this is something that is absolutely put in stone for fall of 2019. We're not able to do that, nor should we.
Thank you, Betsy, for pointing that out. And just to follow up on that, you're absolutely right. There's no way that we can obligate a future board. But there are a lot of us who don't have to go through the election this year. And so as an individual board member, one reason I do like this new path going forward is that as an individual board member, I can say right tonight, in front of the public, that I, as an individual board member who will be on the board next year, really see the need to go forward and to deal with the overcapacity. And so I will do everything possible in my capacity as an individual board member to make sure that this process is followed, because I think it's really important for the public to know that we're not pushing things off and how important it is, the issues that we're dealing with. And so that's for each of us to make that decision for them, herself, himself, or themselves. But one of the reasons why I am excited about this path forward is it gives me the opportunity to publicly say that I will be pushing to make sure that we do what needs to be done, as board members here have been pointing out.
Any other questions or comments before we open it up to the audience?
I had one more question,
Yes,
just a
okay,
technical point. And Greg, thank you. I agree with you, and I'm on board with that too. I'm looking forward to the work we have next year. We're not done. We have a lot to do. Just a technical question on fees and how does it work when we now are kind of taking the size of the question down significantly. So I know that we had expended fees in terms of getting our plans and architect fees and things done. We spent some money this year, and then we had to move some money around in order to pay for that, but we were expecting hopefully that we would get that covered in the referendum. So now that we have a smaller portion, are we apportioning the fees, or are we able to put all the architect fees in the first question, or how are we handling that?
So our agreement with you is a percentage-based fee. So to the degree the question has gotten smaller, the fee in dollar terms is smaller, but it's a percentage that's applied to a smaller dollar figure.
But in terms of engineering studies and other costs that we've incurred for all of the projects, are we able to cover that in the smaller question?
You can, yes. That would be up to the district as to whether you want to do it that way or you're covering them through other funds.
Okay, Michelle? Yeah.
I just want to thank my colleagues and our leadership because this board has worked really, really hard, and this is not where I know we wanted to end up at this point. But I so appreciate the fact that, one, we listened, and that we have another opportunity. So I don't want folks to think that, just because if we vote to limit it to one question, that the overcrowding goes away. But what I'm hoping is that as we engage in another conversation, we lead with our values. We lead with our concerns about equity and student achievement and about education in having this community discussion. And for all the folks who have come up, and I love you, but you criticized and you yelled and you talked about us, I hope you're still there to work with us side by side to come up with a solution that is the best solution for our kids and for this community. So thank you to my colleagues. I really appreciate your hard work, and it's hard. So I just want to make sure I said that.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Pat, can I just make one quick
Sure.
comment too? I would like to thank the community because I think that the community has really helped us to get to where we are, which is, I think, asking this question that we hope to build consensus around as immediate and urgent, and also the continuing the process, which I think that this really is a moment along the way, and this is not an endpoint. But I also, as someone who will continue, who joined the process in motion and continues it now, I think that we do have an opportunity to continue to have this communication with the community, which I know we're going to prioritize in the next section of this conversation. And I think that it's made us, it will continue to make us a better board, a better school district, and a better community that we have this conversation together. So thank you.
Okay, with that, I think it's probably time to turn it over to the members of the audience to speak. So tonight we only have 10 speakers, which is the least speakers we've had in about 12 months. So whereas before we needed to really limit people's time to 2 minutes or less, I think this 3-minute limit is our typical, and so we can go to 3 minutes. That will be about 30 minutes of public comment, and we will give you a warning when you're close, and I think, but with 3 minutes you can just time yourselves and be a little mindful of the people behind you. I will note that of the 10 speakers, the last is Mr. Dart, and I'm not sure if he's a Yankees fan or a Boston fan, but whichever he is, just think of the last speaker as your time limit is coming to an end. So with that, I'll turn it over to number one, Mr. Montgomery. Sorry. Yes. Yes, I think Scott's available to answer questions if you have questions for Scott. So we're starting with Rod Montgomery, and on deck is John Chen.
Rod Montgomery from William Patterson Court. No kids in the schools, just tax bills and complaints. My complaints this evening are about your strategy, your approach to formulating your strategy. The mountains have labored and they've brought forth a mouse. There's a promise of perhaps more mice to come in the future as the mountains continue to labor. But what is your strategy? Mr. Sullivan's has articulated a strategy that seeks compromise evidenced by universal dissatisfaction. I think that's an accurate description of his strategy. I invite you to consider that sometimes compromise is worse than either extreme. You may recall the story of the judgment of Solomon. Does that situation hold here? Don't know. Hope you think about it. Are you taking counsel of your fears, not even daring to give the voters the opportunity to approve a full plan? Will you be studying how to cope with the overcrowding, given that it's going to continue? The small expansion you've proposed for the high school isn't going to remove the need for the trailers that you have right now. So that problem continues. What courses are you going to eliminate? That's one way of cutting down your need for space. Will you publicize a list of courses you're going to eliminate so the public can consider that in deciding whether to approve further expansion beyond what this mouse is going to do? Maybe you should just cut the most advanced courses to encourage those parents who can afford to pull their children out. They won't take any money with them. Maybe you should facilitate and encourage students moving to the Princeton Learning Cooperative. They won't take any tax dollars with them either. Or should you offer the voters the full range of things worth doing in your judgment, and let the voters decide where to land within that range? Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your hard work for Princeton students.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Mr. Chen is up next and followed by Joel Schwartz.
Thank you very much. I'm not happy because my prepared remarks is no longer applicable. So I want to say that with the revised timetable, I think we give ourselves a little more time to continue to challenge ourselves to come up with a plan that's best for our kids and also is most responsible for the community. I continue to believe that the compliance to the affordable housing settlement is continued to be the biggest challenge this town faces. So hopefully with the new timetable, I think we will have a little bit more clarity as to sort of how the compliance settlement will shape up in the coming month. And more importantly, as I mentioned this to President Sullivan at the Saturday high school tour, would love to see the town council, the planning board, and the Board of Education to work together to tackle this very serious challenge for our town. Because we want to bring economic diversity to this town, but I think we also want to be mindful how does that impact this town's economic resources. So now with this 3 minutes, it feels like forever. I just want to comment on one thing about the format of public commenting period. I understand the need for time limit, and I just humbly request that for anyone who cannot finish his or her speech within the time limit, the board please allow him or her submit his speech in writing to be included in the meeting minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Schwartz, and then next is Mia Sachs. I thought he was coming out the other way. No, it's Mia Sachs. So sorry, Joel Schwartz left, so Mia, it's your turn, and then Stephanie Chorney's on deck.
So first, well done. I know this is a difficult decision, but I think we've demonstrated for our children that we can conduct our civic life in a different way than what's happening on the national stage. And we've gone from polarization to civilized discourse and now consensus. The ESIP will address some of the most urgent needs in a revenue-neutral way, and the essential package builds on that. And just to use an academic analogy, I view this core package as the beginnings of a draft, and the second, the 5-6 and Thanet and the high school are a draft that's almost final, but it's not quite the final paper. It needs a little more work. There are some things that have come online, some different ways to play with the pieces, and I'm sure that that will be happening soon. I just want to say that parents concerned that nothing further will happen should rest assured that this process, as contentious as it was at times, has awakened the entire community to the staggering facilities needs within PPS that must be addressed immediately, and I'm confident there will be broad support. For those who've suggested that facilities are a luxury, superfluous, or not a central priority should spend more time in the buildings. I believe it's not too strong a statement to say that the children and teachers experience psychic trauma daily having to inhabit these buildings, and it's imperative that the abysmal condition of the facilities be improved as soon as possible. Someone mentioned strategic planning, which I had the privilege to participate in 2014, and I believe the referendum plans in their final iteration will represent the physical embodiment of those goals, and I look forward to seeing them actualized. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mia. And Stephanie Chorney, I think, is making her way here. There she is. Followed by Dave Wetherill.
Good evening. I also, for the gentleman that just spoke, had prepared to say something different than I needed to say tonight. So I'm mostly going to say thank you. I think you have listened to the community, which I think is very important since the community inhabits the school. Just tonight, we came up with a whole lot of other ideas that hadn't been on the table before. So I know that we can work towards improved solutions and internal solutions that have not been brought up or have been brought up and now can be brought to light. So I appreciate the compromise. I don't think it will be worse than either end of the spectrum. And I think that we can see that the $130 million was not all emergency work, and that taking the time to do things right, to do the things that we need to do and the things that can be done later is important. So I appreciate all that you have done up until now and that all you will continue to do as the years go on. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Wetherill, and then followed by Kip Cherry.
I'm Dave Wetherill, president of the Governor's Lane Condominium Association. We are the next door neighbors of the proposed Thanet development, and we have some considerable concern that we have no way to input our thoughts. So I know you're talking about this resolution right now. You have no problem with that, but we do have a problem with a large number of school buses immediately next door to a residential area where we have 65 homes. We are right next to the parking lot. Some of the members have a very clear view of the parking lot. At a minimum, we would request a lot of screening. If there are going to be buses and things, I think we would be happier with a school there than a series of buses and a bus terminal and things like that, which really don't fit well in a residential area. I would just ask you to, in some way, you wanted to hear all the voices, in some way allow us to, when you get to the Thanet Circle question and what's going to go there, allow the neighbors to have some voice. We are not against the school, or we know you have to expand, but I don't know, buses and residential don't really work so well together. And I have heard words like bus depot and bus terminal. I don't know if that is in the plan, but that would make it worse. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
What was his name?
Dave Wetherill.
Okay.
And then after Kip is Kristen Golden.
Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey. I want to thank you all for your braveness and your clear thinking and your innovation to try something different. I think that's all really wonderful, and I think it's very good for the community and very, very good for the school and for the kids. I have a couple of questions regarding the HVAC and the security. Is there going to be a way for the public to have some input on how that's going to proceed? I know it's in sort of a concept stage.
Maybe that's a question for Scott, if he's, yeah, there he is.
Yeah, so if the referendum passes and the projects advance, it would be a public process, much like this. So it would be regular presentations at meetings of progress and opportunities for input and so forth along the way.
I was very pleased about the idea of stakeholder meetings. I've been talking about that for a while, so it's very good. I wanted to bring up the concept of feasibility studies. I've felt all along that we've been lacking in detailed information to help determine which way to go. I think this will also affect the HVAC, so I just want to bring it up right now because if we went with a 5-6 school, or if we go with multiple additions to the existing schools, that's something that deserves real deep feasibility analysis. There are a lot of issues to be looked at, and I just have a concern that the HVAC might not be expandable if we don't think about that as an option up front, so just so that we design the HVAC system on for the existing school sizes to account for that possibility.
Scott, do you mind, can I ask you a question? Thank you. Can you please explain why full-blown feasibility studies, to the extent they are, were not done, and what the cost would be, and what districts in a similar situation as ours do as a best practice?
Sorry. Sure. So throughout this process, from when it began, there were a lot of different options that were considered. Those are outlined on the website. Those were not developed in the terms of formal feasibility studies with a formal report on each one. We didn't do formal designs of buildings for the K-6 option that would expand all the elementary schools. What we did do is we did look at each of those components or each of those options, and we looked at each of the components. So we looked at each school, what kind of space might be needed under that particular scenario, and we fleshed them out much like you would do in a feasibility study. But the cost to produce a formal study with drawings and designs and the amount of detail that goes into it would have added a fair amount of cost to the district for each one of those options that was looked at. So yes, they were explored. Yes, they were vetted. Were they written up in a formal way? No, because they weren't being advanced as options.
Can I ask you a question? As far as the 5-6 school, I mean, there's been talk about the K-6 option, and I think our educational leader believes strongly in the 5-6 concept. So to the extent that a 5-6 school would be slightly more expensive than the K-6 model and also allow us more flexibility, do schools, and I guess I'm answering myself, but do schools make their decisions solely on cost, or does pedagogy and the individual community weigh into those decisions?
No, cost. Districts are rarely making their decision purely on cost. There are obviously a lot of other factors, and you know, the cost is something that's borne now for the construction, but you know, the potential impact of the educational considerations is substantial. So districts weigh that as well as other things. Just to clarify, the 5-6 option that we were looking at was actually less costly than the K6 option that we had considered. I just wanted to clarify that.
From a construction standpoint.
From a construction standpoint, yes.
Correct.
And Kip, we paused your timer, by the way, but I would just mention too that, you know, I remember one of the first meetings we had with you, Scott, was going through, and one of the reasons that we engaged Spietzel in the first place is because they had on-the-ground knowledge of all of our buildings and the zoning requirements and capabilities of each site. And so when we go through this public process, we'll have to think about exactly how we structure that. But I think one thing that might be useful for many people is to go back to that and just explain how we got to where we got to, because I think those were very compelling presentations that you put together. And when you see the facts, for most people, and again, if Kip or anyone else had a different view, they could express it. But you know, I think for most people, when you see how we got to where we got, you'd see that you can knock down a lot of options pretty quickly just by saying, oh, that's not feasible, well, that would take too much money. We don't need to have a full formal feasibility study, but a public meeting, and maybe we decide we do, but I think it might start with just a level set for people to say, okay, let's go back and look at all the assumptions we set up and knock down before we got to where we are. It might just be helpful to set the conversation at a level and give people the chance to, like Kip, who I'm sure you have questions, to ask those questions. So anyway, Kip, back to your
I just wanted to say in closing that I think there's a real advantage to the multiple additions opportunity because of the fact that we don't really know where our enrollment is going to go. And I think the affordable housing is going to take much longer to be implemented. And so you won't end up with a situation where you might have a half-empty school because the timing is off. But beyond that, I just want to say, too, that I think exploring shared services with the town is extremely exciting. It's the first time that's been tried for, as far, you know, within any memory. And I understand from Tim Quinn that you'll be looking at personnel for maintenance as the first possibility, but it'll expand from there, and I think that's wonderful. And I just want to say, too, that I'm still worried about operating expenses. So because of the fact that you have contracts coming up that have to be negotiated, and we still have this 2% levy issue and all that. So that doesn't go away. And so I just want to just mention that I'm still concerned about that, and thank you.
Sure. Just to point out for the shared services, I meant to mention that at some point tonight, but you know, we have been in communication with the town over the past few months to figure out a process and forum to start talking about shared services, as Tim may have mentioned to you. There's be a first meeting, so nothing's been decided yet about personnel or whatever yet. We've just, Bill and Daphne have agreed to go to a meeting with the town and start setting up a framework for how we develop those processes. So it's a little early to say the personnel's on the agenda. It's not yet, but we will come up with a process by which we
He just mentioned that as an idea. He didn't say anything about figuring it out yet.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks. Kristen Golden next, followed by Ralph Perry.
I'm Kristen Golden, and I am from Governor's Lane, so Dave Wetherill.
Okay. So.
And a lot of us here are from
Okay. Thank you. So that gives, between Mr. Perry and Mr. Dart, 6 minutes total. And Mr. Dart, I'll leave it to you to cut off Mr. Perry when you're ready. You, Mr. Perry.
Remember, the Red Sox Yankees are on. I'm Ralph Perry, as you know. And as you can see, I have a blue shirt on and blue dungarees to support the school. I unfortunately couldn't get a pair of blue shoes, so you forgive me. I assume that I heard you right because I came in late. There's going to be only one item, 27 million on the ballot. That shot my speech into about half. So what I'll do is I will give you the original, a copy of my original speech. And And I will just do a quick summary to embed in here where we came from, and I hope that President Sullivan is going to work to have the public involved in any steps that are going to be coming in the future. There are many questions about all kind of aspects of the referendum as it was until now. And I will stick to what I know best, and that is the tax impact on the taxpayers of this town. There have been 4 different issues of tax impacts since April. The last one you saw tonight. In April, I sent a note to the board saying there was something wrong with the tax impacts that were issued by Phoenix in April. And I was told time and time again, we'll get you together with Phoenix. I'm still waiting. Cooperation with the public. In April, I sent an email to the board suggesting a different way of selling bonds, which could save $30 million to the taxpayer. The first reaction of the tax committee was it's illegal. Well, they didn't know better. It is very legal because the bonds that have been issued for the last 20 years and these bonds that we have now all use my illegal system to save money. So I'm still waiting for a response on that, too. Nobody asked me any question. Last month, I presented the board with another suggestion about what to do, and that was at the request of the board, with the latest numbers and presentation of Phoenix. And I pointed out that there is a major error, at least I think there is a major error, maybe I'm wrong, in the numbers. What you saw tonight is one of those reports that Phoenix came up with, and it has errors in it, and this is what you're going to the public to have the public vote. And under normal conditions, I would say, stop the train. But you can't stop the train here. The $27 million is an important part that has to be done now. You can't have air conditioning breakdown. You can't have one room hot, one room cold. You can't have leaking roofs. So I'm all, yeah, do the 27 million, which you have decided, and then let's all of us sit together and talk about the future and how to do that. And that's basically, I hope, that my experience of completely hitting a brick wall for the last 6 months, no response to any one of my suggestions, is history, is past, and will not happen again.
Mr. Perry, I would like to, Mr. Perry, right here, up here.
Front of the room. Can I finish?
I just wanted to say something. I wanted you to know that the board president can set up an ad hoc committee to look at certain things, and I hope before he leaves he does that, and I hope that I'll recommend that you participate in that. I think it was a lack of information based on where we were in the process, and I think once we get moving, you'll see that no one's trying to keep information. But Mr. Sullivan, sorry to throw that out there, but I think that would be a good decision. Thanks.
I thank you. And I have 2 things to say. One is, I don't know if it's too late, but on the $27 million, if you change the 30 years to 20 years, the taxpayers are going to save $6 million. And it's going to cost them only about $5 in tax impact for every $100,000 of assessed valuation, or as you like to say, about $40 for the average house. Anybody that is above the average house doesn't care about it. The last thing I want to say is I want to thank you very much for your Herculean volunteer effort and what you are doing and making in behalf of the public of Princeton. You are really appreciated. It's not just that we think you don't do anything. Thank you very much.
Wait, Mr. Perry? Mr. Perry, can I ask you something else? Right here. So a lot of times you want us to look at the land that's at the corner of Franklin and Walnut, which belongs to the Westminster, which is a beautiful piece of land and would be like the best. But it is wetland, sorry. So you keep throwing that out, and I just want to make sure people understand it's wetlands, and the variant, I would never build something on a wetland.
Nor do we own
Use
it.
the microphone, Mr. Perry, please.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I know it's not available for sale, but it keeps getting thrown out there. You keep throwing it out, and I just want to comment that it's a wetland, and it just, and the other thing is, those guys are going to be in litigation for at least 18 months before they even can come out of water to speak to anyone. So I just want to, you know, because you keep writing that in a lot of your stuff, and I just want to say.
Let me try to bring you to update to you as what I see. Westminster right now is like juggling 3 balls in the air. There is the university down at 206 or 95.
Right. We all know they're in litigation. So
No. Well,
yeah.
That's important.
So can I just ask you guys maybe to take this offline?
Okay.
And if you have questions,
we can take
if board
it
members
offline.
have questions, just please
Okay.
ask me first, and we need to keep the dialogue moving. So
Thank you,
Mr. Perry.
can I just say one thing?
Well,
There is-
Mr. Dart probably wants to speak now, but we appreciate your
He'll get
everything
his
you
3
said.
minutes.
You took it.
Westminster, because that's important to understand. Westminster would be willing to peel off 5 acres of land, which could be turned over. However, that's what they told me. However, they haven't got the authority to do that. The Chinese have to quit. My money is that the 6-year suit against the Chinese that is going on now is going to make them quit sooner or later. That's my money on. But
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Ralph, and we can take a look at it then. But I simply wanted to say thank you and congratulations. I think getting a $27 million referendum on the ballot and passed is a great accomplishment. And it's been a difficult environment with the changes in the tax law. And, you know, it's interesting. If some of the ideas that came up this year that will come up again next year, if they are the right answers, they will come up again. And the community will get behind them if, in fact, they're the right answers, because they will have gone through a process. So I enthusiastically support this approach. It has more benefits than I have time to go into, and many other people shared my comments. And so I simply want to say congratulations and thank you, and I look forward to working cooperatively and warmly and collaboratively, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Microphone, Mr. Priscilla?
If no other comments, then we're on to item D, which is the ballot question here. And can I just have a motion to open it up? Sorry, a question, motion? Well, we had a sign-up sheet, so yes. Oh, I'm sorry. So, okay, if that's okay. Yeah, I think, you know, if that's all right, we'll move on. We're going to Scott. I don't think we've seen the last of Scott, so there'll be more time for questions. So can I have a motion for item D1, Daphne, and a second? Michelle. Any questions on the
Sure.
resolution?
I just have one question. A question Mr. Perry had was something that I had been thinking about too. If this passed, Stephanie, and this were a smaller amount, and we found it was really beneficial to go over 20 years or even 15 years rather than 30, are we able to do that based on the way the wording is?
There's nothing set up for bonding.
Okay.
They've all been estimates.
Okay.
So we could bond, we could do it for 1 year, we could do it for 20 years.
But the estimates were
whatever.
showing the public, though, of the bar graph over 30 years.
That's right, because
That
that's what's been.
That's what's
We're
estimated,
not
but that's
changing
not.
anything. We
Okay.
don't know until this vote what's going to be on the question. Once that's done, then Phoenix will make estimates.
Okay, so by the
for moving
time
forward.
December 11th comes,
Right.
we will know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It'll still be an estimate until the bonds are sold.
So when do we decide if they could be 20 instead of 30-year bonds?
When, after the vote.
After
After
the
the
vote.
vote. After the vote, and when it's all, like we're doing right now, we're doing refunding. So that's all done during the bonding process.
Mary Line said last time that it depends on what the interest rates are, and I think she's about 1.5 points over. So it depends what the interest rates are. I think they'll sell the bonds in January. I believe that's a public event. Is that correct? The selling of the bonds?
No.
No, it's not a public event.
No, it's being done differently because it's just a refinance.
Okay.
I have another question about, maybe it's for Scott, for the specificity of this of this resolution, and then what happens after this. So let's just assume that we pass it tonight. It goes on the ballot on December 11th, and it passes referendum. There, as we know, and as some of the speakers tonight have in the past pointed out, this is not as detailed as some of us would like, right? That there's still decisions that need to be made. As an example, the types of materials in different spaces. There may be other things as well that could fall in that category of things that would happen post-referendum. And I'd just like to know, Scott, typically what is the process from approval of referendum to, ribbon cutting or whatever? What is the process for people to make their sentiments known about different details of how things are going? Are you reporting back in public board meetings monthly?
Yes.
And
Yeah, it'll be working sessions with whoever the district wants to be involved on a day-to-day basis. That'll be a regular series of interactions where we'll progressively review more and more decisions as the process moves forward. We will be presenting regular updates at board meetings and/or other public forums as you guys see fit. Happy to do community sessions to kind of update the community on where things are and so forth. So. That will continue to happen in ways similar to how it has happened over the last several months.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions before we vote on this resolution? Okay, Stephanie, if you.
Patrick Sullivan.
Yes.
Betsy Baglio.
Yes.
Beth Barron.
Yes.
Debbie Bromfeld.
Yes.
Jessica Deutsch.
Yes.
Bill Hare.
Yes.
Daphne Kendall.
Yes.
Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz.
Yes.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for all your work in putting this together, and I'm talking to you out in the audience there, as well as everyone on the board. This has been a long process. I think it's a good first step. I'm very happy that this is a 10-0 decision after all the contentiousness and input. This is a smart board, and everyone's got an opinion, but it's a good thing that they do. It comes to the right result in the end, and Mr. Montgomery, I am confident that this is a first step, is a good strategy, and we will get there. I think we will get to a beautiful school for our children at the end of the day. I'm very confident of that. So thank you all for all of your work on getting us to this first step.
And
And with that, we just need a motion to adjourn. Greg, and a second, Daphne. Thanks, everybody.